All right, so we're starting the stream right now. I need to double check to make sure that things are working. So it says that we're live. Let's go to our preview. It's not showing up yet. All right, sounds like we've got audio. Yep, we're good. All right. Hi, this is Paul Stoltz from iPhone Dev TV. I want to do a live coding tutorial, and so I'm going to jump into Xcode. We're going to create a simple app. I'm going to show you how to use the interface designer. I'm going to then show you how to use the auto layout so that you can make sure that your interface looks good on the iPhone 6 as well as the iPhone 6 Plus to make sure that all of your UI elements are going to stretch up and down. We're going to be using Xcode 6, which is the new version of Xcode that's going to work with iOS 8 and all of those apps that you can make for that. And this is a really good starting point if you're interested in getting into Apple Watch apps, because Apple Watch apps are going to be based on iPhone apps. So they're sort of going to go hand in hand. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump over to my desktop now so that you should be able to see me and the code on the screen. This should be streaming in 1080p. I'm just going to double check to see if I can get that on my external monitor. So it looks like I have 1080p. The video coming off my camera is right now cropped a little bit, but that shouldn't matter too much. Once we get into the code window, everything should look good. So it's looking good on my end. Let's jump right over and see how that looks. All right, so you should see my desktop now. And what I have here is Xcode. This is Xcode 6.1. This is going to be what you're going to use to get started. And the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my mouse. So I have mouse posse here so that I can highlight my mouse so you can see where I'm going to click. So when you first start Xcode, let me show you how to find it. You can find it in your dock here and click on it. You'll see this window. Now, if you don't see it there, what I want you to do is click on Spotlight, which is in the top right corner, and you can search for Xcode. Or what you can do is you can use the keyboard shortcut to bring up Spotlight, which I really like doing, which is Command Space, and then you just type in Xcode here. Now I have two different versions of Xcode. I have the beta so that I can work with WatchKit apps, and I also have the normal version, which is the publicly released version for submitting normal apps to the App Store right now with iOS 8. So let's go ahead, hit that. That'll open up Xcode. Now, if you don't have Xcode, I've got a couple of videos on how to download it, which you can look into. It's on the Mac App Store. So in Xcode, we are going to create a new project, and I'll just click on that. If you don't see that dialog, the other way to get access to that is the File, New Project. Now, when you think about projects, projects are a way for you to include all the different settings, all of the assets, the resources, the videos, the sound files, the code files, the data files that you need in your application. So it's a convenient way to manage all of that and to create different apps. You can create a free app, you can create a paid app, you can create a project that has both types of apps, as well as other types of things. So we're going to get started with this project right here, and I'm going to select a single view application. This is generally going to be where you start. It's going to be on the application tab for iOS. So make sure it's under iOS. If you're doing an OS X app, that's a Mac app, that's not quite what you want to do to follow along with this tutorial. All right, I am streaming in 1080p, so you should be able to see everything. I really recommend the 1080p stream so that you can see all the code, you can read all the small text. And I'm going to do a 1080p stream just because it gives us more clarity. So I hit that button to go to the next screen. Here we're going to give it a name. What we're working on in this tutorial, I have a little project that I want to do. I want to create a contact address card, and so I just want to have some information about the user. It's going to do first name, last name, email, age, and then I was thinking something like the mile pace or something like that, just something to have a floating point value, which is like a decimal place value as a attribute. I guess I could do something like my cholesterol levels or something like that, but I don't know that off the top of my head, so I'm not going to do that. So let's just do that as a starting point. Maybe this is a contact card for a running app. So we want to know running information so that we can find running partners in our application. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. The product name that we're going to do here is going to be whatever we want to call it. And I'm going to call it the contact app because it's going to store a single contact. Then we're going to do Swift language. Now, what I want you to do is if at any point you get stuck, you can always pause the video and you should be able to go back a little bit and rewatch something if you fall behind. The organization name here is going to be your name. The organization identifier is going to be a unique string. Now, I have com.pulsal, which is a reverse of my website. And this is a technique that you can use. So if you have a website, just use the reverse of that. If you don't have a website, just pretend you own your own website with your name. Just do com.yourname. And that is a good starting point. This value needs to be unique, and it's really only important when you're going to publish the app on the App Store. Okay, so next we want to stick to Swift, and then we're going to do universal just because that keeps it here when you try to do multiple things. Now we'll hit next, and I put this in my projects folder, which is on my desktop. So you can see that I have a projects folder. If you don't have one, click on new folder, create a projects folder, and then put it in that. So I have a ton of projects. What's important to understand here is when you're working on an iPhone app, there's a lot of ideas you might have. You might want to try something, you want to test something, you might want to do sort of iterative steps. That's why you see so many different files here. I also teach courses, which is why I have a ton of files here. So we're in the projects folder. I'm going to hit create. I'm going to uncheck Git because I don't need that right now. That is if you're working on a long-term project and you want to track all your changes, like in Microsoft Word where you can track changes. We're not going to be using version control for this. This is just a simple app that we'll be creating. Now, I want you to hold the Alt or the Option key and come up to these traffic light buttons to close the app. There's a little plus button. If you click on that, that will maximize the window so that you can get the full benefit of the full screen. And next up, I'm going to resize it a little bit because we're going to have an iPhone simulator on the right side. So your first step is just to hit the play button. And doing this, it will start up the application and it will start a virtual iPhone screen for you that will be over here on the left. Now, if you have a developer account, you can plug in your iPhone, and this drop down up top is going to allow you to select your particular iOS device. But if you don't have a developer account, I recommend just working with the simulator. It's a lot faster than working with a real device at this point. So we want to open up the storyboard file. This is where we're going to design the user interface, and we're going to use auto layout once we get our UI on the screen. Okay, so if you're enjoying this so far, just hit the like button and share this with your friends. I'd like to do more streams. Post a comment or something on the chat window, and we can go ahead and get started. So we're making a contact app, and what I want to do here is just drag out some labels. It's drag and drop, and if you have a trackpad, you can use a 2-finger click and then drag to do some of the connections that I'll show you in a moment. But for now, you can just do a left click, which is just a 1-finger click, and then a drag to pull out some things. So we can add a button here. This is going to be add contact. And we're going to put this in the center somewhere down here. I don't know exactly where I want to position it yet. I just want to get it somewhere in here. Once we do that, I'm going to search on this sidebar. So if you don't see these settings right now, you want to make sure that this sidebar icon right here is open. That's really important. Next, you're going to look for something that looks like a home screen button. If you're not on Yosemite yet, this is going to look a little bit different. It's going to be like a 3D cube. Click that. That's going to show you all of these attributes. Now, you can switch between the grid view and the list view. What you're looking at right now should look something like this. This is going to be the list view, and I'm just going to show you. It's going to give you information here that's really helpful in understanding how this works and the different things that you can add to your interface. The primary ones that we're going to focus on are starting with label, button, and text field. These are all the general ones that we'll use here. And for this activity, we're building a context card that can store this information. So we need to use labels, we need to use buttons and text fields to get that user input. So I'm going to drag out a text field here, and the text field is going to be a little bit taller than the label. So I'm going to use the text field to sort of just drive the UI. And for the labels, we need labels like first name. I probably want a contact name. So I'm going to just drag labels out onto the app, and there's some blue align marks that will appear. We can move things around based on the alignment. So let's just say this is the contact app, and I'll center this in the center of the screen right here. So it's now in the center. Underneath that, we're going to have this text input. I'm just going to drag out a size temporarily so I can get the alignment rectangle here, and we'll align that to the right and to underneath the contact app title, but I probably want the title to be bigger. So let's double click on, we'll just select the label here. And then on the sidebar on the right, you're going to select this little slider icon that's the attributes inspector. With that selected, you can change attributes here. So we're going to change the font. You can change it so that it's bold, so it's going to stand out a little bit more. And you'll notice that as I'm doing this, the text is getting all mangled and we're not seeing everything because it's trying to fit in the same space. And if I go too big, by clicking on this a lot, you'll notice that there's a lot of clipping and we're not getting what we want. But it is a bigger font, so I do want the bigger font. Just as an experiment to play around with fonts, you can change the font. It doesn't have to be the system font. So there's a tool in the editor panel that's going to be sized to fit content, and that has this nice hotkey on the US keyboard, which is Command equals. So if I just type that, that will automatically resize this element. Now, you have to keep in mind that you have to have selection on the item. So I have to reselect it if I click on any of the windows or any of the elements around the canvas. The canvas is what we're working on right now. So if I do that, boom, we do the command equals. Now we can see that right there, and we'll realign this text field underneath that. One of the gotchas that you can have here is because there's a status bar up top, if you accidentally put content up here, you're going to drag the whole view around rather than the actual app. So be careful where you place it. If you do put it up there, there's this measurement tool that allows you to change the X coordinate position, and you should be able to pull it out from under if it's a little bit bigger than the status bar. So this one is a little bit bigger, so I was able to get it out. Now I'm just going to align some UI elements. You can really name this stuff whatever you want. I generally like to have the baseline or the center set up with this. And then the width of all of my text fields, which are going to be these components, is going to be based on the longest title that I have over here. Now I'm going to cheat and I'm going to show you a shortcut, which you definitely should use. And that is to use the Alt or the Option key so that you can duplicate content quickly. And you can do the same type of thing in Sketch or Photoshop. If I hold the Option key and let go, you'll see that I go back to just moving one item. But if I hold down the Option key and then I let go of my mouse, you'll see that I've duplicated that content. This is super convenient when you're trying to build a form or any kind of user interface that's going to have repetitive elements in it. So the contact app needs to have a first name. It needs to have a last name. It needs to have another attribute. I have the email address is something that I want to store here. And then I'll put the age. And then there's one more I want to include just so that we can get some different data. And you see I didn't click after I held the option. So I'm going to hold Option again, click and drag, and that's going to duplicate the content. Alternatively, you can drag one after the next out. I find this is a lot quicker to get stuff out here. So we're going to put in something like mile pace here. And that's just going to be a numeric value. So for values that you can expect here, we want to have something like 12.1. I'm pretty slow. I run in Luna sandals and I'm not quick enough with them. I'm 28. And let's just pre-fill some information so you can see sort of what kind of data is going to go in here. And my email address is paulsolt@iphonedev.tv. So with that, this is the kind of UI we can expect. Now, if I go ahead and run it, we're going to see some interesting results on the simulator. What's going to happen is we're not using auto layout, so content's going to get clipped, content's not going to be centered, and we can zoom in over here and just look at what it's doing. We have the contact app is off center, and then all of our text fields go way off screen, and our add contact button is not in the center. Now, the other buttons I want to add besides add contact, just for showing off this app, is I want to clear all fields. So I want to have a clear button. And then I want to have a save and load, because the ultimate goal of this app is to show you how to save and load. So let's have a save and then a load. So these three buttons aren't really meant for the commercial version of the app when I go to release it on the App Store, but they're going to help me test it to make sure that it's working. We can also change what simulator we're running on. I can change this if I go on this button here. I can change this in iPhone 4S, which looks really small when you actually look at these devices. It's so tiny. So this is an iPhone 4S screen, and when this starts up, you'll see that the content, again, is off-center. It's not going to look good, and we can't even access our load button. So the UI needs some work, and that's where auto layout comes into play. Auto layout is going to allow you to customize the UI components so that they stretch and fill the user interface as you intend it on different size devices. So let's go ahead and add that. Now, when I'm doing auto layout, there's a couple new things that I want to point out in Xcode 6. We now have this concept of a sizing class. The sizing class is going to allow you to target different devices. You can have specific constraints for different sizes. What that means is sometimes the UI on an iPad is going to look different than the UI on an iPhone. And the size classes allow you to do that. And it's a little bit funky. When I click on this, I see this weird little trackpad drawing pad that shows me all these rectangles. And those rectangles are going to correspond to different size screens. So if I do the rectangles, two rectangles on the left, that's going to be like an iPhone screen, or this could be a pop-up on an iPad. If you had like a little pop-up that appeared when you clicked on a button, that's going to be the same sort of layout format. The any is going to be the default thing, and this is where you want to start. If you don't start on this one, it becomes very frustrating when you want to switch to supporting a universal-sized app, when you want to support both iPhone and iPad or different size classes. So it's really important that we stick to any. So if you see any, that is these four squares. They look a little bit strange. It's kind of the shape of an iPad, kind of not. Just go with any and you'll be good to go. So you can just click off of that for that to work. Next up, you're going to want to bring up the document outline. Now you can find that in the editor tab here. You can show the document outline. Sometimes I find that these buttons don't quite work correctly, or they show the wrong text, but it doesn't really matter. It does work. It's going to show you this document outline, which is this window. It's super useful when doing a layout. Anytime you need to rearrange content, this is basically your layers that you're going to see in your application. L stands for label, B stands for button, F stands for, I guess, text field. So they just, they go for the F there. I don't know why it doesn't say T, but it just says F. And then you can see some of these are populated with values that I put in there. So since I put some default parameters in there, those are going to display in there for us to use. Then we can see our buttons have the B down here. And I think that's all we have. We just have three different types of UI components. Now, the first step in auto layout is to set up your user interface like you expect it to sort of look on this virtual screen. It's also important to note that this doesn't quite look like an iPhone to me, even though what we see on the left with our preview here is going to be an iPhone screen. Let me just move that up so it's not covering or underneath my photo there. So they look different, but when we bring them on top of each other, what you'll notice here is that contact is aligned right here. If I bring this right over here, you can see that in the horizontal direction, they are matching. And if we look at the next set, these are all matching the horizontal direction. Let's take a look at the vertical direction. I'll just bring the iPhone up, and you'll see that everything is in line like we see it. So basically, what happens when you design an initial user interface, and this is different from Xcode 5. In Xcode 6, the new version, things get pinned to the left, which is the same behavior, but because we have wider iPhone, it doesn't behave the same as it used to with the iPhone 5 and the 5S and the 4 and the 4S and the 3G and all of those fun devices. Those never grew in the horizontal. position, so we never had this issue where our content was off-center. So now you're going to see a lot of off-center content until you add auto layout. Thanks, John. All right, so we've got some people in the chat. If you have any questions, just post them there. I'm looking over there periodically. I've got 2 monitors here, so I can sort of see what's going on. All right, so now that we have the UI, we're going to start adding auto layout. And I like to add auto layout either from the top or from the bottom, depending on the type of content I'm adding. If it's sort of bottom-focused content, you might add it from the bottom first. And this could also apply to the left and the right sides. But since we're dealing with iPhone apps here, we start in either the top or the bottom because that's generally how you're going to look at the app. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to align this contact app label to the very center. And if you have any kind of titles or anything like this, the reason I'm showing you with this title here is because it helps you understand how to center content at the very top. You might center different types of UI. This could just be an image or something that you load in from a file. So there's 4 different things that I want to talk about here. We have leading space, we have top space, we have trailing space, we have bottom space. And actually, you don't see all that right now. And that's because when I do, this is a right click and drag, or if you're on a trackpad, this is a 2-finger click and drag. And what I like to do on the trackpad, let me see if I can show you real quick. Let's bring the trackpad right here. And you're going to bring 2 fingers. You're going to click down with one of the fingers, and then you can use your other finger to move around the screen. So that's a really important tip if you're working on a trackpad, if that's your only mouse, or if you're on a MacBook and you're working with that. So the other thing to keep in mind with this canvas here is when I drag left, you're going to see context-sensitive information for connecting some of these layout constraints. And when I drag right, you're going to see context-sensitive information. And with that, that can be helpful at reducing the number of options, but a lot of times I find that that's frustrating because there's more constraints that I want to specify all in one go. And so what you'll do here is you'll drag over to this document outline, which we added right over here in this panel. And the view is the containing canvas. So when I select this, you can see that the entire iPhone screen is selected. That is my background. And what I can also do here is I can change the background color. So let's go ahead, go and change the color. I'm going to select, I think, an orange color here. You can select a previous color, or if you click on other, that brings up a little color dialog. We can switch this to magenta or red or yellow. Let's go for something that's not going to be overwhelming. Probably a gray would be best if you just want to play with the background color but not overwhelm the user. So here we have a gray background. I can rerun the app and we now have the gray background. All right, so getting back to auto layout is our way of telling the iPhone where objects should be positioned and how they should stretch, how they should be positioned relative to each other. And it's a really important tool for getting our UI to line up correctly. So we need to establish 2 things. We need to establish size, and then we need to establish position. Those 2 things are really important in any visual component that you're going to see in an iPhone app. You have to specify where it's going to be and how big it's going to be. With that information, you can then start establishing constraints for where items should be positioned relative to other items. So in this example, we can also do center alignment in both vertical and horizontal directions. So I guess the first thing I want to show you is I want this to be centered horizontally. And you can see that when I drag left, the only option it gives me is the vertical, and I find that frustrating. You actually have to drag diagonal to get more options. That'll give you the top, vertical, and center. But you can get even more options if you right-click and drag to your view and let go here. It's going to give you every single option that you could possibly want, which I find is the best way to make connections because you can hold Shift. You can hold Shift here to select multiple items. If I didn't hold Shift, I would click on one, then I do the drag again, and I click on another, then I do the drag again, and I click on another, and it's just so repetitive. It becomes annoying when you can look at this, we have 5 different labels, 5 different text fields, 4 different buttons, and then there's another label. So it's a lot of UI components. So already I'm counting like 15 things. So it's 15 drags. And if I have to drag multiple times for each item, you can imagine getting carpal tunnel from that. So I do this, I hold Shift, And what we want here, we don't want the leading, we don't want the trailing, we want to center this. So the first thing we look for is the center horizontally in container. The container is the view that we've selected here. And then we're going to go for the top space. Now, if I just do those two things, that's enough information to tell you I want something at the top and I want it in the center of the screen. So if you're looking at the camera, I've got my hand in the center of the screen towards the top. If I wanted it in the bottom, I would tell it I want it in the bottom, and we can do the position based on that. So these two pieces of information are enough to give it its position. The other nice thing is we already have the size. When we did that, the command equals symbol to do the editor size to fit content, that caused the size to already be set to the ideal size. And now what you'll see is we'll have these blue lines appear. These blue lines are indicating that we have layout constraints, that this top edge is going to be there, and this is the center of the app that's going to be centered for this label. So now if we go ahead and run on an iPhone 4S, that our contact app is centered. Nothing else is centered, but this is important. So now you can see how this is going to work. We're going to set up the constraints for each one. The next step is we can actually set up constraints relative to others. So we have horizontal and we have vertical spacing, which are really important in establishing height as well as sort of width positions of our objects. And the last thing I guess I want to do is, it looks like first name and last name are our longest strings here. I tend to like to have the label come all the way to the left until we get that blue dashed line. That's going to be the recommended distance away from a label. And then I just align every of these text fields underneath that based on that value. And it's really up to you. You could also do the same type of thing with your labels here. You could make them so that they're all right aligned, or you can make them all left aligned. I would recommend doing whatever Apple does for their labels. So take a look at the settings app or something like that to see how labels interact with text fields or areas. And there's a ton of ways to customize. So if you don't want a border on these, there's border options under the text field under this button right here. So I can make them borderless, and that really can make it so that your UI sort of just pops into place, or you can make them look a little bit textured or weird or stuff like that. All right, so we just resized these. Now what I want to establish is both a starting position for this as well as the distance to the top. And the way that we can do that is we can link this and this UI element so that they are going to have the same vertical centers. That's going to keep them aligned together so that they're not like mismatched. We want them to stay together no matter where they are in the interface. And then we want them to always be hugging our outside edges. Let me find the screen over here. Always hugging the outside edges. So wherever the outside edge, we want them to hug there. So this is where we're going to deal with the leading and the trailing space. So I guess the first thing that I want to establish is the center Y. So this is going to be our vertical centers, so that they're going to be at the same position. So I'm going to hold Shift. I'm going to click on that. The other thing I want to establish here is the horizontal spacing. So if I click on that, we'll get the distance that's in between these two objects. And now what you're going to see is we might see some orange or red, depending on how many things are in your interface. You're going to see orange or red lines on your interface. And these are a little hard to see, but they're right in here. And these dashed lines mean that we don't have all the information that we need. We have specified a relationship between the label and the text field, but we haven't established positionally in the X coordinate or how big they are. And so we're still not going to see much of anything different over here. Even though the preview here shows that it's up top, it doesn't always render that way. And the other thing that actually might be more useful than looking at the iPhone app, I'm going to hide that for now. I'm just going to drag this out bigger. We can switch into a preview mode with the assistant editor, which is these two circles. It's the Venn diagram. It's also, if you're on Maverick or an older OS, you will see a tuxedo icon. That is useful. I'm going to hide our panel over here by pressing this button right here. So that's going to hide that panel. This button will bring it back if you need to look at your files again. For now, we're just going to focus on the UI. And with the UI here, we can see the code file that's associated, but we also have another option if you click on the breadcrumbs up top. So right here, there's a preview option, And this allows us to see what our app might look like on an iPhone device. And right now, you can see that it's going to render that label in a funny spot. So it's sort of off to the side. And that's because we haven't specified enough layout constraints for that interface item. And to finish that up, let's bring this over and sort of match that. Now, again, if you want to add multiple devices, I could add iPhone 6 Plus, and you can see how large that is and how it's going to lay out the UI. So they each are going to sort of give us random layouts. Let's do the leading space for this, and that's going to give us a starting point for our first label. So now we're establishing the X position, but we also need the Y position. We need to know how far down we are, and we have a relationship that we can derive from the contact app label. So if I right-click on the text field here for my name, Paul, I can drag up and do the vertical spacing, and now we've established the vertical space. So you can see that the first two parts are correct, except our size is not correct. And so now we need to establish the trailing size. So I'll right-click and drag to the end here, and the trailing space to the container margin is going to make it so that our thing will stretch to the edge of the screen. So here you can see it, and if I were to see if I can grab, how do I grab this? I guess I can't grab. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, so now we can see both the iPhone 4 screen. I really want to move these around, but they don't want to move. I don't know. Okay, so we see two different size screens, and you can see how our edge here matches on both. So that's going to match sort of what we see over here, and now we just have to work each one down. So we're going to start going through this again. I want the vertical spacing, again, defined by the text fields, because those are going to be taller than the labels. And for me, that's how I visually anchor things in the vertical direction when I have these text fields. And let's just go down and do the vertical spacing between each of these so that we can get that all out of the way. Just make sure that you click on the text field in the open space. Don't accidentally click on something else. So it's very sensitive to where you click. If you were to click on some of these labels, you might accidentally click on a constraint or something that already exists, and that would be weird. All right, so we have the vertical direction, and now you can see that our UI is looking awful in this preview, and that's okay because we're not finished adding all of our constraints. Next up, I want to establish the horizontal spacing and the center Y so that these two things are always in the vertical line together, and we'll do the same for the email and the text label. Sometimes you misclick or something, just click off of it onto empty canvas, then right click and drag over, and then hold shift, and we'll get both of those in one go. So you can start to see how the UI is going to fix itself or break itself a little bit more. We still need to establish a lot of information about how things are going to be laid out until it starts to look good. But these are the beginning steps that should align our things together. Okay, with that, we need to establish the starting X position. So I already did this top one. We already had the leading space, so we'll just have to apply that to every other one and say I want the leading space to container here. I want the leading space to container here. I want the leading space to container here. And we'll do the same thing for that one. So now you can see we're getting the starting point all set up, but the widths are not set, and that's because we haven't set that constraint. So everything here is very explicit. We need to tell Xcode exactly how big, how wide, where the relative sort of constraints of our user interface, where they're going to sort of go together. So here we'll set up the trailing space, and then we'll do that for the next three. It might be a little slow, so you might have to give it a second before you try doing the next one. And there we have all the trailing space. So now you can see our previews are looking great. Now we just have to fix the issues with our buttons on the bottom. All right, so the buttons on the bottom become an interesting challenge. All right, so what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna move these buttons around, and I'm gonna keep some space for our other buttons, but I want them up a little bit. And that looks pretty good. So the first thing I want to do is I want to align this to the center, and I'm going to drag it over to our view in the document outline. We'll look for center. I'll hold shift, center horizontally. And then actually I don't want any of those options. I want this relative to the thing above it. So I'm going to right click and drag up, vertical spacing. Okay, with that, the way you want to think about layout is relative. I really want the save button to be in the center, so that's the first thing that I'm going to tackle on the next line. I don't want to set the leading space. I don't want to set the trailing space. I actually want to set the save button to be in the center, and then I want either button to be a horizontal space away from it. So those are going to be on either side, and they're going to be centered in the same vertical line. So let's go ahead. We'll establish a distance away from this button with this vertical spacing, and then I can leverage the center X because it's already been centered. The button above it has been centered, so that these can sort of just stay in line with each other. And then establish a relative constraint to the button on our left and a relative constraint to the button on the right. So I'll select horizontal spacing and center Y. That will keep it in line. And if we look, you can now see that clear jump to the left side. Load is the one that's off the screen on the iPhone 4, and it's offset on the iPhone 6 Plus. So we just do the same thing that we just did here. I right click on the label, I drag over to load, I click on horizontal spacing, and I didn't hold shift, so I'm gonna have to do this again, and then I select center Y. Now you can see all of our buttons are aligned and we are good to go. So that's how you design your app UI. Let's test it out on a real device. The simulator is going to pop up on the left, and you can see that the iPhone 4S simulator matches what we see in the preview. To me, it looks a little bit shorter. Oh, because this is not a 4. This is a iPhone 5. This is a 4-inch screen. It can be a little bit misleading when you look at these screens. If I wanted to look at the iPhone 4S, that's going to be a 3.5-inch screen. Okay, so let's switch back to an iPhone 6 screen. This is going to show us yet another screen size. This is going to be a little bit smaller than our iPhone 6. But since we zoomed out, your proportions aren't going to look the same. I don't know if I can unzoom what we did here. It's not very important right now. Okay, what's more important is that we can now create some code that's going to go with this. So in order to store information for this contact app, I want to save stuff to disk and I want to be able to load it up again. And we're going to have to add some code to do that. We want to represent a personal contact as a code file that's going to have different data attributes. So in this code file, we're going to have strings, which are our text, as well as numbers. And we're going to have two different types of numbers. We have the mile pace, which is going to be a double type. And then we have the age, which is going to be an integer type. And integers are whole numbers, where double are floating point values that have a decimal place. So you can see the difference between these two numbers here. So let's jump over to some code. I'm going to pull up the standard editor. So we're back to a single view. Well, actually, I like the assistant editor. I think that will be good for this example. But I'm going to pull open our sidebar. Nope, that was the wrong button. The sidebar on the left, or you can use the keyboard shortcuts, which are really handy once you learn them. And with that, we can probably hide our document outline. We don't need that right now. And the preview is not what we're going to use anymore. So I'm going to do a shortcut. I'm going to click or hold the Alt or Option key, and then I'm going to click. Well, actually, I don't have a class yet. So let's create a new class. I'm going to right click over here, do a new file. And with this, we can create a new Cocoa Touch class. It needs to be sourced under iOS. Then we'll click Next, and we will call this our contact. We're going to subclass from NSObject. This is going to allow us to save and load from a file using the archiving process, and this is going to be with a Swift language. Hit the Create button. My pop-up is really big, probably because I was on a bigger screen or something like that. And I'll just hit the Create button right here. That's going to add the code file. Now what I want to do is I want to bring up the interface, because I still want to look at the interface, but but I also want to look at the code file. So if I hold the Alt or Option key and I click on contact.swift, that's going to put our code file on the right here. Alternatively, you can use the breadcrumbs and you can switch between preview to manual, and you can drill down and find the file that you want, which is right here. The only reason I'm doing this is because the data object that we're going to create here is going to be based on the attributes that we have over here, and I want to make sure that I can keep track of them and keep them in the same order. So when you create a new class, you're going to want to create properties or variables that are going to be associated with that class. We want to create a contact object that we can share in our application that's going to have all the information that we have here. We might use it on this screen, we might use it on different screens. If I want to send an email, we might add a button so that I can dynamically just send an email to a given contact card. So let's go ahead here and create a variable called first name. And I'm going to specify a type using the colon, a space, and this is going to be a string type. We'll do the same thing for the last name, email, and that's it for those. So let's go var last name, also a string. Notice there's no semicolons in Swift. We're not having to do semicolons like in Objective-C or C++. Next up, we have email. This is also going to be a string. And then we have age. Age is not going to be a string. Age is going to be a int. It's always going to be a whole number. I'm only going to keep track of whole numbers for the age, so it's going to be number of years. After that, we can add the milepace, which I want to be a double value. So this is going to be milepace. And this might be a contact that I want to go running with. So I'd store it like that. And we'll just say double here. And that's it for creating your first Swift class. Now, if you do this, you're going to have compilation errors. And let's take a look at them over on the left. So here we have a Swift compiler error. It says class contact has no initializers. This is a really important thing. And this is what makes Swift different from other programming languages. Swift tries to be safer. It tries to prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot down the road. And this is definitely a situation where I've had issues. I've had crashes in my Objective-C based applications because I messed up the initialization phase. And that's one of the things that Swift helps you with, is it forces you to do this step before you finish writing this line of code. So something like this would potentially work in Objective-C. It does not work in Swift. And what we'll have to do here is add an initializer. So Xcode sometimes can suggest what to do. If I click on this, let's see what it says. It wants to just give me an initial value. I don't want to do that because that's not going to set me up for what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an initializer. And the way you create an initializer is you start with a init. It's a special keyword that you start with Swift. And then you do an open parentheses. Inside of this, you are going to put the values you want to put in here. Now, as a code style, I like to keep them the same name as the properties that we've just declared up top. So these are our properties. And this is our initializer. The property we're going to have here is going to be first name. Again, I have to type colon string to show the type. Then we're going to have last name, colon, string. So this is a little bit repetitive, but it's being very verbose, and this is important because we need this information to create a proper contact. Next, we need our email, also a string, and then we have our age, which is a double. Now, I want to point out something here. You're seeing me use the same names as what I used up top, but these are actually different variables that we have here. And I mixed up age. Age should be an int. So let's go back and fix that in a second. So then you're going to close a parentheses once you finish the comma separated list. Let's fix this to int. So you should say age int. And then we have milepace double. Next thing you see are our curly braces. These are going to signify the entire size or chunk of code that's going to run for our initializer. So this is all the code that's going to run. In here, what we need to do are two things. We need to set all the properties. So we can use the passed in values, or we can use our default values if we have any default values. The next thing we need to do is we need to call the init on super. And this needs to come at the very end. So you'd say something like super.init and that will be golden. What you'll see if you try to write this first, though, is that it's going to complain about all of these properties are not initialized. And so we need to go through and initialize each of these properties one by one. So if you start writing this, you might be tempted to write something like first name is equal to first name, and you'd notice that this is not the correct way to do it. And that's because we have this concept of scope. Much like you can have people with the same name, you can have multiple Pauls, you can have multiple Susans, you can have variables in your program that have the same name, but not all the variables are immediately visible within where you're working. So if I build this right now, you'll see that the first error that we have, I'm using the Command B shortcut to build, but you can go up to Product. You follow my mouse. You can go down to Build, which is this option right here. This will tell you the build failed. You want to run this every time you change code because it's going to show you where these errors are and how you can fix them. All right, once we do that, we are going to look at the error and we can see the current error. Sometimes these errors don't go away, so it's helpful to build every time you write these lines of code. Now we have another concept that I want to introduce, and that's the concept of having a variable versus having a constant. A constant is something that does not change, and all parameters that are passed in our initializer are going to be constant, so they cannot be changed. And what we're trying to do right now is assign a constant to a constant. And since it's a constant, we cannot change it, so this is a mistake. And this is actually something to help you write good code in Swift. What we have to do, and what I want to show you is if I right-click on this first name, I can jump to definition. That's going to take me to where it's defined. If I do the same thing for this one right here, it's going to take me the same thing. So you can see that it's not getting the property which is up top. So this is like having two Bobs or two Pauls. They're different people, even though they have the same name. And so with this, we want to get access to this. So there's this thing called self, which is kind of like a pointer if you're familiar with C++ or anything like that. But self is this idea of the code file, essentially. It's the class that we're in. So we're in context. So when I say self, that's going to be the current instance or current version. If you want to think about it like people, that's the actual person. When I say self, I'm going to be talking about myself. And so there's different attributes. I have blue eyes, I have blonde hair, these different types of attributes. So this contact class that we've created here, this is an object that we're going to be working with, and we can use self with the dot syntax to access the property name. Now, if I do the same thing I just showed you, if I right-click and I click on jump to definition, you're going to see that it jumps up top to where we have our properties defined. Now we're using the correct one. So we're taking the parameter that's passed in first name, and we're applying it to first name up here so that now we have a value. And this is really important when it comes to constructing the object, and I'll show you how to use this object in a second, but we have to finish writing this code so that we can fix the error. So we're going to run through the 4 remaining variables doing the same syntax where we do self dot, and then the name, and then is equal to the passed in parameter. Autocomplete will give me some suggestions here. I want to do last name, and is equal to last name. And if I build it again, you'll see that we fixed 2 errors, but we now see that self.email is now initialized. So this is one of those tips where Xcode can tell you, okay, you didn't quite set everything up. And so we can come in here and we can go and fix the email is equal to email, and then the age is equal to age, and then our mile pace. Now, if you wanted to use a default value for one of these, say you wanted to have 8 minutes as the default mile pace, you could write something like mile pace is equal to 8.0. But since we're passing in a value, we really want to use that because that's what's giving us through the user interface. So it's really important that we can store all this information. What we have here is your first Swift object that you can store data in. This is really key. Now, if I build it with the Command B shortcut, you'll see that build succeeded. We can run the app and it should work, though it's not going to do anything. All right, so now that we have the app working, we want to tie the data model to the user interface. We're going to have to create a contact object in our viewController.swift. ViewController is going to be the first screen that we see in our single view application. So every screen that you have in an application is going to be controlled by what we call a view controller. And that just is something that's going to manage what's visible on the screen. It's going to manage all the actions and behaviors that can be possible with your application. Okay, so with that, we want to create a contact. So I'm going to go over here and create a variable called contact, and we're going to use lowercase for the variable name. So it's lowercase c, contact is equal to contact. And here I can pass in all of these attributes. Now, it would be a lot better if I pulled in the attributes from our user interface. So what we'll need to do now is hook up our user interface to actually use this object. But let's go ahead and just put in some initial values here. So first name is going to be Paul. And actually, let's not use my contact info just so that we can see someone else's name. So let's use Joe. And then his last name is going to be Smith. And when we're typing this, let's switch to the single view. So you can see this all in one line. Everything you see here is very important. So if you're going to follow along, pause the video and type everything as you see. Every character, every quotation mark, every these and colon is very specific. If you don't write this correctly, you're going to see lots of red and errors when you go to build your application. All right, so the email we're going to pass in, I'll just use mine. I don't want to give you some random person's email address. Next up, I'm using tab to go to all these auto-completion things. And this is one of the nice things about Xcode is it can give us suggestions. Let's say Joe is 40 or 50. He's mile pace. Let's say he's a lot faster than me. Maybe he does 6-minute miles, 6:20. Let's say he does 6.5-minute miles. All right, so as you can see, I have a mile. If you're international, you're probably like, why is Paul doing miles and not kilometers? Well, I do miles because I live in America, and I guess that's what we use most of the time. But you can abstract this concept, or you can make conversions so that depending on the user's preferences, you could switch between which is displayed, even though in your code, you're going to store either a kilometer or a mile, depending on the preference of your user. Okay. So we've got a contact. One of the things we like to do with contacts is sometimes print them out. So I'm going to do a print line on the contact and see what it looks like. If I add this print line statement and in parentheses I put a quotation mark, we can do string interpolation, and you can see that down here on our console, we see the output of that statement. So this is going to display a memory address, and this is the default NS object implementation of a description method or a description variable. So it's not very engaging. Let's fix that by opening up the contact, and we are going to add a new method, or actually it's a variable, computed variable. It's variable description, and this is going to be a string type, and then all we have to do is return a string. So for the string, I want to return some attributes about the person. So I'm going to say, let's just abbreviate it a little bit. We'll say first, and then we'll display the first name. And so I'm using string interpolation here, where you can actually inline a variable into a text string that we can then output in the app, or we can output on the debug console, which is what we're seeing on the bottom sort of right side of the middle of the screen. So we have the first. Maybe I just want to display the name as one thing. So let's just say name, and we'll do first name, and then put a space there, and then do last name. And then I'll put in age, or no, I have email next. So we'll put email, and we'll inline the email. Now you'll notice that I don't have to do self here. I'm not worried about the scoping issues that we had in the initializer. And then we have our age and then the mile pace. So string interpolation allows you to input your variables and display them on the screen. And you'll see how this works in a second. Let's just finish the mile pace and put this up here. And it starts with the backslash and then the open parentheses and then the variable name. Or it could be an actual value. So you could pass in a number or something like that. So if we do that, we build, we're going to see a failure here. So we're trying to override the provided by the NSObject class, which is a class that Apple wrote. I'm going to show you how to find out about that. If we right click on this NSObject at the top, we jump to definition. Oh boy, it's okay. So it's not going to work. And that's because anytime you have a compilation error in Swift, you cannot do anything useful. So you have to fix the errors before you can jump to documentation, which I find super frustrating. So if you are stuck, you're gonna have to go to Google, or you're gonna open up another Xcode project and try and pull up the documentation, or you can just go to documentation, API, and reference, and you can get to it. But I wanna show you the actual code. I don't wanna show you the reference. So let's right click on NSObject and jump to definition. And that's weird, it's not working. Let's build it again, see if we can jump to definition. All right, so my symbols are not found. What I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna close Xcode, I'm gonna open it up again, see if that fixes our problem. So we're gonna go to Xcode, quit Xcode. Sometimes there's issues or bugs with the current version of Xcode and things won't work properly. So let's pull open Xcode again. I have it pinned to my bottom bar. If you don't have it pinned, you can pin it by clicking on this button here. Right now it's pinned, so it's always gonna be in my dock, or you can use Spotlight to find it. Let's see if we can find NSObject's definition. All right, so it's still not working. Try it one more time. Okay, I don't know why it doesn't want to jump to, maybe we don't have, no, it should work. This is just Xcode being annoying. I've definitely done this before. So quick help is not working for my application. That is a problem. I want to show you quick help. This happens when you hold the Option or the Alt key and you click on a symbol. So it's working for string. That's great. Let's jump to string. Okay, so this is where a string is defined. And actually it's interesting because string in Swift it's a structure, but in Objective-C, it's an object. So, and then it's converted between the two languages. So it looks kind of gnarly, but these are all the different things that a string has, and it provides a lot of functionality for appending and doing different work with strings. Okay. Hey, Chris. Thanks for watching. All right, so got a couple people watching the live stream right now. Otherwise, you can catch this when it's recorded and published on the site. Okay, so there's a lot to do when creating a new app, but I'm just taking you through the full process. We've got this description, and now you can see that when we run it, it prints out a whole lot more interesting things on the output down here. So we now have Joe Smith. I put the name together so it actually looks more interesting. So it's his full name. I've got the email, which I use my email just so that you're not emailing a random Joe Smith and then he's complaining that you're emailing him about my course. And then we've got the age and a mile pace. So there are different attributes. And we created this in the view controller. So the next step is we created a temporary contact, but what I really want to do is I want to pull in the contact from the user when they press a button. And in order to do that, we need to connect the user interface. And I'm going to switch back to our assistant editor on the right. So follow my mouse to the top right corner, click on the assistant editor. In here, you're going to open up the storyboard. And since we switched to manual, you're not going to see the proper code file. So you're going to click on the breadcrumb up top and click on automatic. That's going to switch back to the view controller. This is really important. This needs to say view controller because this is where we're going to establish our connections. Now, the connections that we need to add here are to allow us to either get responses from the buttons pressed or to get info from the user input. And so right now the user input is pre-populated with some text that I put in here. You can just double click and edit this. If you don't want it, you can just delete it and it will go back not having anything. For now, we're going to keep it so that we have some information. And I want to add the add contact button as a action down here. So I mess this up all the time. And I guess it's kind of frustrating because in Objective-C, you could drag to the .m file and it would automatically switch to action. But here you don't get any of those fancy behaviors because there's only a single code file, which is a better thing. So you have to remember to always switch this to action when you're working with a button. So what we'll do here is we'll say add contact pressed. And this is going to be for touch up inside, which is when you're going to touch the screen and your finger's going to lift up. Inside the button, that's going to happen. So as a sanity check, I always like to do a print statement. So we'll do a print line. So print ln, add contact. And we don't need a semicolon. I'll hit the run button up top and you'll see that we have an issue. So I commented out the previous line using the shortcut. That's the command /. I need to comment this line out. The other thing that you can do is you can just do 2 forward slashes here. So if I just do 2 forward slashes, that's a comment. And so it's important to understand what comments are. Comments are your way of turning off code. It's things that you can see that the computer's no longer going to interpret. So in this case, the iPhone app is no longer going to try and print out that temporary contact card we made up at the top. I've turned it off. If we go ahead and run, you will see that the app starts and runs. Now, when I press add contact, you'll see down here, I made the console window bigger. We're going to see add contact every time I press that. So if I press multiple times, you're going to see it print out 3 times. So with that, we now have a hook to pull in information from the user interface, as well as hiding the keyboard, which you're going to see when we are in the iPhone app. This is something I also want to point out. You don't see the keyboard right now. I can change my name to John. You don't see the keyboard necessarily right away until you click on one of these things. And on your device, you might not even see it at all. You're going to need to make sure that you connect or toggle the software keyboard. So there's 2 options in here, and it's using the Command K shortcut. So connecting the hardware keyboard is going to make it so that you can type on your keyboard. So I'm typing on my keyboard right now and it's not working. I need to go to hardware keyboard, connect hardware keyboard. That's going to allow me to use my keyboard on my Mac, which is a whole lot easier when you're testing and debugging your applications. Next up, normally when you have an app with a connected external keyboard, so if you connected your Bluetooth keyboard, which I have right here, if you connect this to an iPhone, it's going to hide the software keyboard so that you can just use the physical keyboard. In order to get around that issue with the new simulator, you have to press the Command K shortcut to hide and show, or you can go into that hardware menu to make it appear. So then you can type on the software keyboard. It's a little bit slower, but it's going to give you and simulate the experience on the iPhone app. All right. So with that, we have a hook to grab this information, but we have to establish outlets for these different things. So I'm going to right click on each of these and we're going to establish a connection. I'm going to put that at the top underneath the class line. And if you don't have line numbers on, I'm going to recommend that you turn them on. So let's go ahead and do that before we make this connection. Click on Xcode, go to Preferences. You can change your fonts under the fonts and colors. Right now I'm doing a 16-point font. Normally I use the 14, but I figured I'd use it a little bit bigger for the stream in case you weren't watching at 1080p. And line numbers is right here. And when you click, you'll see that in the gutter, which is on the left side of the code, they are going to appear. So with that, let's go ahead and add 5 outlets here. An outlet's going to give us a code attribute that we can modify or access at runtime to get user input. So this is really important for text fields where a user is going to be typing in all of this important information. They want to save it when they add the contact, so it's important that we can grab it as an outlet. Let's do first name text field. Again, here I'm going to be very verbose. So we're using camel case. It's going to be a lowercase f, and then every other word is going to be capitalized. So it's first name text field with capital N, T, and F. And we're going to do the same convention for any variable we create in our application. For any class, you'll see that we use an uppercase first letter. For any variable, you'll see that we use a lowercase first letter. And that's an important distinction. This is a code style. Very important to keep this and use this style because it's helpful when you're working with other programmers. If all programmers use the same style when you're working with a particular language, it's a lot easier to help them out or to get help from someone else. So style is very important, and it's something that you should focus on. Match whatever you see me doing here. Okay, so what you're going to see here, this created some auto-generated code. It's creating an IB outlet just like we did with the bottom function. This created auto-generated code, which is a code block, which is this chunk of code, which right now runs 1 print statement. We can do the same with last name and just run through each of these. Again, I'm going to be descriptive with these. So I'm going to use whatever the type of thing it is and use that in the name. So this is the age text field. I always use text field because this is a text field object. And I know that when I'm working with a text field, I have certain attributes like the text, which is a property that I can access and use as both user input or if I want to display something on the screen. And lastly, we want the mile pace. So I'm just going to put these all together. You'll notice that the type here is UI text field and it's got an exclamation mark. That means that it's an implicitly unwrapped optional. And if you're paying attention at all to Swift right now, you'll see that I've commented a lot on someone's blog post who talked about how implicitly unwrapped optionals are just like an eyesore for Swift. I totally disagree because it's really crucial. You wouldn't be able to connect these IB outlets without implicitly unwrapped optionals, which just mean that Xcode can set up your user interface and connect the code to the user interface. And it's working with the optional type, which if you've taken any of my course videos or watched any of my course videos, I talk a little bit about. And we're not going to get into any optionals this time, but the premise of an optional is that it can have a value or it cannot have a value. So it's either nothing or it's got something. And these are implicitly unwrapped, which means that you can always use them. And it's just a weird thing. So you'll see that symbol a lot in Swift. All right, so we're running through a lot of stuff. This is taking a little bit longer than I expected, but these are all the things. Like when I talk through the process, it makes it a lot longer. And I do want to give you information. So if you like what you're seeing in this video, press the like button, subscribe, and I can do more of these videos. If you're watching this video somewhere else, you're already in the course, so don't worry about subscribing unless you want to see funny YouTube videos that I put online. All right, so next we have these connections. So in our add contact pressed, we can create a contact. Now what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to create a new method, and we're going to use the func keyword to create a method in Swift. And this is going to be create contact. And actually, this is where we can actually interact with some optional values. I wasn't thinking of using optionals here, but this is a great place to use them. So create contact is going to be a method that we can call. This is a chunk of code that we can reuse in our application that will be able to create a contact from the UI. So I'll just call it create contact from UI. This is going to return an optional type. The optional type is going to be a contact. So we already created the class. In Swift, unlike Objective-C, you don't need to import code files all over the place. It just works when you're within your own project. So this is super helpful. We're going to create an optional type. And let me give myself some space down here. I don't like looking so far down when I'm creating code. All right, so this is our function. This is our first method that we're creating besides the add contact pressed. When I build the application, we're going to see a missing return. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a stub. And a method stub is everything you need to do to get something working so it's not crashing, it's not breaking the compilation, but it's not going to be fully functional. And the way we start that is I need some value to return. And so for this, we're going to create a contact, and it's going to be an optional type. And I've got the type wrong in the return type up here. So what you're seeing right at the end here, this is the return type. When you see that arrow and then whatever type, that's going to be what it's returning. Well, we're going to return an optional type because when you're dealing with user input, you don't know if they're giving you valid input. And if they're not giving you valid input, you can't make a valid object. So you'd have to return nothing because the user is giving you something bad. And with that, we are going to finish the stub. I'm going to create a variable. It's going to be called contact, and it's going to be of type contact and then question mark. So that's an optional contact. And I like to set this to nil. This shows me that it is not a valid contact yet. And at the end, we can return contact. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to add a contact, and we're trying to save the information. And I need to parse the input that the user is giving me. So we're going to have to do some statements here to parse the input. If I build again, you'll see that the error goes away. So we're good to go again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we're going to use this, because I think seeing how this function is going to be used will help you understand what we're going to do. And I'm going to do something a little bit fancy. So we could say something like var contact. Now, this is a different contact than the one down below because it's within its own function. So every function is going to have its own local variables, and that's what we're creating right now. So we can create a contact from the create contact from UI method. That should give us something. Right now, that's going to just give us a nil object. Then we can test it, and we can say if the contact is not equal to nil, we can do something. Otherwise, it is nil. We can print something out. So let's print out a message in either case. So let's say error, invalid contact. We can print something out like that. Or if it is valid, we can say print line valid contact. And then we could print it out. And we go to do this, and what we're going to see is that this type, if I right click on it, is an optional type. Now we can do these two steps in one line of code. So let's go ahead. I'm going to comment out these 2 lines. We're going to use this new concept in Swift called optional binding. And this is where we can create a temporary variable that is going to store a valid type, a value, rather than an optional value. So that means that it has to be a valid value so that you know in your code that you can use it. So we're going to say if let contact is equal to create contact from UI. Then we can open the parentheses. So that's going to do the same thing that we did in the previous steps, except now when we run, we'll be able to print out the contact. However, when you click this, you're going to see that it's an invalid contact because we don't actually parse from the UI. So let's go in now and implement parsing from the UI. The first thing we need to get is the first name. So what I'm going to say is if first name dot is empty, that's going to tell me if the first name is not empty. And I'm going to say if not, and I'm actually doing this a little bit wrong. So it's first name dot text field or dot text, and then we can say is empty. And Xcode's probably not a fan of what I'm doing right now. And you can remember, if I scroll up to the top, we need to make sure that we use the variable names that we have here. So they're very verbose. So first name text field. So that's our first check. If I wanted to, I could print out a message saying something like, I'll just do it for one. I won't do it for all. You can add these if you want. First name is empty. So we need to validate that the input is good. And so we're going to have to go through a couple of these statements. And you can sort of embed them all together as one, or you can do a compound statement so that you don't have to do all of them. The benefit of doing it like I'm doing right now, or if I did a compound statement where we do last name text field dot text dot is empty. So if I'm saying if it's not empty, which means there's a valid value, then I can have context-specific error messages based on whether something is empty or not, and that can be useful. Okay, so if I know that the last name text field is not empty, and let's look at this attribute. Of course, that doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to pull open the documentation for a UI text field. I'm going to open, let's not use Safari. Let's do documentation, API, and reference. So if I search for UI text field, which I definitely recommend searching for, that should take me to information about it. It has a text attribute, which we can see is an implicitly unwrapped optional. That means that the text should always be there. So we don't need to unwrap it as an optional value. Don't worry about it. Just do what I'm doing right now. So the next is we need to make sure that the email is not empty. So I'm going to say if not, and now the exclamation mark on the front that you're seeing here, that's the not symbol. And this is used in Boolean logic. So right now, what I'm really saying is if I write this out explicitly, with the email text field, I can use the dot syntax to get the text attribute. This is going to be whatever text is there, which is pulsehold@iPhoneDev.tv. And I can ask it, is it empty? And I can say, is empty equal to false? And that's essentially what I'm saying in this line. it's just a little bit more typing, and I find it a little bit harder to read. So I like using the exclamation point because I think it makes it readable. It reads like English. So now when you see exclamation point, you're going to say not, and then whatever the value is. And so the value is going to be this expression, and isEmpty is going to return a bool value, which is either going to be true or false. So if it is empty, it's going to be true, then we're going to negate that, and we're going to get the opposite. So when we say an expression like is not empty, that means that we have a valid value to work with, and that's important for data validation. Next, we need to grab the age, and we need to convert it to a double. I guess the best thing to do here is a NS number formatter. So we're going to create a variable. This is going to be let NS number formatter. It looks like I lost autocomplete or something. So things are going to be a little bit challenging to work with. I want to do number formatter dot, I think it's unit style. It's really hard to type without autocomplete. So I'm going to close Xcode and open it up again. Let's quit it. I'm going to quit with Command Q, stop all tasks. I'll stop the simulator as well. Click on the simulator and click Command Q, and then we'll start it up again. Okay, we'll uncomment this and we'll see if code complete works. I'm going to press period and press escape, and nothing. Okay, we're going to have to go to the documentation. I'm going to look for NS number formatter. It's number style, not unit style. I'm mixing up the date formatter. I don't know why Xcode is not giving me quick help. I'm going to switch to single view, see if this helps. All right, my next solution for this, I'm going to clean the build. So I'm going to go to up top, product, clean. And I'm going to rebuild and see if that fixes our autocomplete. Nope. Okay, one more trick that I have done before. I haven't tried it with Xcode 6, so I don't know if this is going to work. I'm going to pull open the organizer. And I'm going to close the project. Next, I am going to delete the derived data for the contact app. So if you see contact app over here, that's going to get rid of it. I'm going to quit Xcode again. I'm going to open up Xcode with Spotlight. For a reason, it's popping up on my other monitor. I'll just click on it down here. And we'll reopen a recent. So I'll go File, Open Recent, Contact App. We'll build, cross our fingers. Oh, there we go. Awesome. I am good for something. All right, so NS number formatter. I start typing this, however, press, oh, it doesn't work. All right, let's get rid of all errors. Number format. It just hates me today. Okay, so it's not going to work. Number style is equal to NS number. I'm going to have to type blind here. Formatter style dot decimal style. I'm trying to type from memory. I think this works. It'll tell us if it works or not. So it succeeded, which is great. Next, what we're going to want to do is we have to convert our numbers that we're getting from the user input. So we have the age and we have the the other value, and both of them are numbers. And we have to convert from a text-based format into a number format that we can do addition, subtraction, whatever you want to do with it. Use it as a real number rather than a text version of the number because they are distinct values. All right, so let's jump in. We are going to say let age is equal to, and then number formatter dot, I want number from string, and I pass in the string, and this should work. So we'll pass in the age text field dot text. That's going to give us the text, and we're going to convert it to string. Normally when you have autocomplete, this is a lot easier to write. I'm just writing stuff from memory right now, or you have to pull up the documentation for each of these things. And autocomplete, I don't think is going to work, so I can't jump to the documentation, which is frustrating. I can't jump to the definition. It's telling me the symbols are not found. I have to report this as a bug to Apple. All right, so that's going to give me a number. We really need to look this up, though. I really need to know more information about this. So let's pull open our documentation API and reference. NS number formatter, if I search that in the documentation reference, we're going to look for the string. Okay, so I'm not lying about the style. The style is right here. These are the different values. Number formatter style in Swift. And then we're going to look for string from formatter, string from number, or number from string. Right here, converting between numbers, that's this little subhead here. We're going to look for the number from string. This is going to take a string, and it's going to return an NS number object. So we're going to have to ask that NS number object. If I jump to the NS number object, I know already that this has an attribute where I can get the integer value or the int value, as well as the double value. So that's going to be crucial for converting our values. So this is an NS number that's being returned. So I'm going to use the dot syntax on it and get the int value. And then hopefully that works. Next, that's going to give us an optional type. So I'm going to have to check it, and I'm going to say, is age not equal to nil? Then we can go ahead and use it. And rather than do that statement, let's do the optional binding. So if I say if let age equals, and then what we have up top. So we can just copy this right in. All right, so now we have another issue because autocomplete's not working. We need to actually do optional chaining, and this is where we have to put a question mark in here before the period. So it's a little bit confusing, but what you see right here is you have to put a question mark because the value that's coming back from here is an optional value. I want to say, well, if that value exists, give me the int value for the age, and that's going to give me the age. So now we know we have a valid age. Otherwise, we would have an invalid age integer, right? We'd have an invalid age. So if that's also true, then we can do one more level, and I accidentally have two lets there, so let's fix that. We can have if let, and then this is going to be the milepace is equal to number formatter dot number from string, and this is going to be the milepace text field dot text. Now we have to unwrap, use optional binding, or sorry, optional chaining to get access to the property here, and autocomplete's still not working for me, so this is frustrating. But I'll just do double value. That's going to give us the milepace. Now we have all the valid data has been provided. Create a contact. So now our contact we can say is equal to, and let me hide the mouse. Contact is equal to contact, and then we pass in all of the values that we have here. So for the first name, I'm going to pass in first name text field dot text. For last name, I'm going to do last name text field dot text. For the email, I'm going to do the same thing, email text field dot text. Since I know that all those are not empty, I didn't do any email validation. That's something you can add. That's another step. I don't want to do it right now. And then for the age, we can just pass an age. That's going to be unwrapped value. And then the mile pace, we can just do mile pace. Now we have a valid object. So let's see what happens. We already wrote the code to see if it's going to be a valid contact. All of this code was just to validate that the values that the user input were good. We have some default values and we have a code error. All right, it looks like Swift, the int is not an int32. So let's do integer in the int value. So right here, where we get the int value, this is getting a 32-bit integer. There's a difference between a 32-bit integer and a 64-bit integer. So let's go for integer value. And we solved our problem. If I click on this, awesome. So integer, you'd have to look at the documentation and it's not working here. Should be a 64-bit with Swift. I'm running out of water. Okay, we are approaching an hour and a half. I want to wrap this up soon. We're almost there. We now got the user input from the user. We have to test to see if this works. We'll cross our fingers and see if it runs. And I cross my fingers. Hopefully we did everything correctly. When I press add contact, we should see a valid contact printout, and look, it's right there. So we got it. And oh, it looks like I didn't realize this, but my face is covering up some of the output, at least in the small window. Maybe it's not a problem in the large window. I'm just going to shift it over a little bit. I won't be able to see because it's delayed like 30 seconds. So it prints out valid contact, which is a great thing because now that's something that we can save to disk and then we can load it up. And then we can finish the app. We're getting close. Okay. We created a contact. I want to save it. We have a contact to save here. So let's store the contact, and I'll probably want to have a stored contact attribute. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a contact to store in our program. So it's going to be var my contact, and that's going to be a contact, and it's going to be let's make it an optional type. And down here, we can just say my contact is equal to contact. Now, the benefit of doing what we just did, we created a property variable. This allows us to work with the contact in different methods. So we have an add contact press. Now we have to add some connections for our other user interface buttons. I'm going to switch to the assistant editor, and we are going to connect our clear and our save and our load method. So I'm going to right click and drag for the clear, and we'll type clear button press. But before you press enter, click on action and then hit connect. I'll do the same for the other two. We've got the save, or right click and drag. We're going to create an action again. So click action before you type anything so you don't forget. Save button pressed. Again, being very verbose and using a verb here because that makes it so that you understand that this is an action or a behavior and it's going to do something. Last but not least, we have the load. So load button pressed. And you can see I did that wrong. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do Command Z to undo that. Now, the other problem is you can run into an issue, and I didn't show you how to solve this yet, but you can run into an issue that will break your application when you first run it. And so I need to make sure that I remove this outlet. If you see referencing outlet, I want an action, not an outlet. So I'm going to click on the X. Now it's not going to crash on start. And if you do that accidentally to any of the others, make sure you remove the connections. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck and it's not going to work. I probably should have shown you that a little bit earlier, but I forgot. We want to make sure this is in action, so try and do that first so that you don't forget, and that's a load button pressed. There's a lot to show you here. Maybe next time I shouldn't talk as much and I should just do it and you can watch. Let me know in the comments if you like the commentary as I'm typing, or if you'd prefer just to see me type the code faster. I need to refill my water. Hopefully we can finish this video before my camera dies. It says battery's low. 1 sec. I need to change the battery. Probably should get an AC adapter for this. Turn it back on. Got the nice output. I have to use Magic Lantern to clear the display. And it looks like we're sort of working, but my lighting is changing. I have to configure it. And we are golden. All right, so we can keep going for another hour and a half. All right, so I have these buttons set up here. And get my preview up. Everything looks good. And now we want to be able to save an object and load an object. So what we're going to do and clear our display. To clear the display, let's go ahead and implement that one. What we're going to do is each of our text fields we need to set to nothing. And we do that by saying something like first name text field dot text is equal to empty string. So it's a double quotation mark followed by a second double quotation mark. That's going to clear out the display, and we'll do this for each one. And as you can see, autocomplete is not working. It's great. So I just have to type this and hope that I type well. Hopefully, when you do this, it is more responsive. I might have to reset my computer. I'm not really certain why it doesn't like me. Either that or because I've been running the beta version, things aren't working appropriately. So let's check out and see if we can clear the display. So I'm going to run this. Clear. Boom. UI is totally clean. That's awesome. All right, next is adding save and load. So in order to save, we're going to use the NSKeyedArchiver. And then we're going to go in the reverse direction for the loading. And generally, I create a status variable when I'm saving because I get a value back and I know if it's successful or not successful. We also need to create a path to save in, which needs to be in the documents directory. The amount of work that I have to keep doing keeps growing. Once you get into the habit of writing apps, though, you can copy and paste this code, or you can find it online. So let's get the documents directory. I'm going to create the documents directory is where we store files in our iPhone app. And I'm going to create a method to get this. So this is going to be func documents directory. And this is the only place that you can save stuff, essentially. Well, this is one of the few places. There are a couple. This is going to return a string. It's not going to be an optional. And this is, oh man, this is going to be hard. NS search. I hope autocomplete works. Okay, I'm going to have to Google this or search in the documentation. All right, so it is the NS search path directory. This is how we can get access to it. Oh. All right, so normally this would work with autocomplete. I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm going to open up another project that I know has it. We're just going to copy that functions. So I'm not going to spend the time writing them. There's these two functions that I'm going to copy. And let's close this application. So what I want to point out here, let's just look at the code. I added two methods here, and I'll just walk you through them. So this is going to return a string, And this is basically boilerplate code that you have to write in order to get access to the folder on your iPhone app. And you really need to do this, otherwise there's no way to save and load. So this is the NS search path for directories and domains. That's the name of the function. It takes 3 parameters. They also take parameters that are very verbose, and without autocomplete working, it can be very tricky to write this code correctly because you have to memorize these things, and I don't have them exactly memorized. I have a general idea. But we're using the NS search path directory. This is the document directory. Notice that it's document directory, not documents. That's specific. I don't know why they do it that way. Then we have the search path domain. Basically, it has to be user domain mask. I don't know if it works for any other values. This is the only one that I've ever used because this is what was recommended. The next is, should it be tilde expanded or whatever. This is if you're using relative paths in the user's home directory, that's fine. Last thing we have is we have an array that's returned back from this. Well, this function call for these particular attributes is only ever going to return one value for us. And if it's not returning that value, you're either not an iPhone or you're doing something wrong. So it's always going to be the first value. If this breaks, your entire application is not going to work. So this is crucial. It's always the very first thing. You could do first object or whatever. That's going to be an array. We index the first element using the square brackets. And then we need to downcast it as a string because it's going to come back as like an any object. So we'll do that, and that's going to give us the string value, and then we can just return that. So let's see what that looks like when we print that out in the save function. The other function I have here is going to create the documents directory and append a path component, which is the file name, so that we can actually save it. So let's create a path variable. I'll say let path equal file in documents directory, which is my helper function. I'll pass it the name of the file. This is going to be our contact.plist. Plist is going to make it so that we can see it in Finder and understand what it's going to look like. And I'm going to show you how to open up Finder using the path that we're going to print out with this information. Next, we want to print the file path. So let's say save, and then we'll do string interpolation here for path. Run it again. All right, we got 1 vote for less talking, more doing. With the path here, we can run it. I have to actually press the save button. When I press the save button, that's going to print out this path down here. This path we're going to copy and paste. Now, you'll notice 2 things in here. First, the path is different from Xcode 5 path that we are used to with a simulator. So that's a big change. Second is that instead of having the name of the simulator, you now have a unique identifier for the simulator. So this is the iPhone 6 simulator, which has this weird random string name. It's a unique identifier. As well, the application itself has a unique identifier. And unfortunately, that changes every time you run the application, which might not be an unfortunate thing because it prevents you from having an issue in your released app on the iPhone, because when your app is either deleted and updated or something like that, the file path is going to change. And so this itself is going to force you to make sure that you don't store a path, because every time I run this, you're going to notice that this says 5F4 when we run it again, and I press save. It's going to say E64. So the path is changing every single time. So now I have to copy this path. Okay, so let's copy this path and let's go over to Finder. In Finder, once I have a window open, I'm going to go to Folder, which is Shift-Command-G. That's going to bring up this little dialog in the center of the Finder window. We can click on that, and we can paste in the new path that I have. So you can delete whatever was there, paste in the path. This is going to be what we saw down here, and press go. Doing so, we should see the documents directory. Now I'm in the list view. You can switch to probably this view, and you can see more of the hierarchy. Another tip I have is customize your toolbar. Make sure you add the path right here. Incredibly useful when you're working with path information and saving stuff. The nice thing about this, at least, is when you go between running. So we're going to see E64. This folder is actually going to update for us automatically, and I guess Apple's going to maintain the symbolic link or something for us, so that when I go back to Finder, where did it go? Finder. you're going to see that we're in 8.5a, which is a different folder path, but this is still the same document directory. And if I save anything here, it's all going to stay in the same place. So the nice thing is that Finder is going to keep us in the same folder path. So I'm currently in the documents folder. I actually like it if we could see all of the folders. So these are other folders that you can save into, but we're going to focus on just the documents directory, which is this folder. So this is our save path. Now what we want to do is archive an object, and I'm going to have a success value if it's successful. Initially, this is going to be false. And what I can say is success is equal to NSKeyedArchiver dot archive root object. This is going to be hard without autocomplete, but I want to pass in path, and I want to pass in the actual object. I think the object comes first, and I have to pull up on the documentation to double check, but we'll see if we can write this correctly. So I'm going to want to pass in the contact, which is going to be my contact. And then I'm going to pass in the path, which I think looks like this. It might be toPath. And my contact is not unwrapped. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to do an optional binding. So if let contact is equal to my contact, this is going to give us a valid contact if it does exist. In case we can go ahead and save it. And we want to pass in contact instead of my contact, which is the variable that we have here. And it's toFile. So I got the name wrong. Okay, so I fixed that error. Now it's working. We're going to see success is some value. And then we can say if else, we can print out an error. Let's go ahead and run it. I'll hit add contact and save contacts, and we get a crash. All right, so what I did quickly is I looked at my output, and I'm going to look for why we crashed. And you're going to see encode with coder unrecognized selector. So you could Google this and you would find out what we have to do next. And I'll tell you, we need to make it so that we conform to the NSCoding protocol. So this is what I might have mentioned in the beginning. NSCoding protocol is a protocol where we say we respond to certain methods, and then when we respond to them, we can get better access or additional functionality. So Apple wrote this code for us. So we need to implement two methods here. One is encode with coder, and without autocomplete, this is going to be, again, hard to write. I don't even know if I can pull open the documentation. Nope. So we'll look up NSCoding. As you can see, search is great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy whatever we see here and paste it into our code file. So we're looking at the NSCoding reference. These are the two methods that you need to implement: init, and then the other one that we crashed on, if I pull open that window, was the encode with coder, and we'll just pull in this declaration. So encode with coder is used for saving, and so what we need to do here is we need to say, I don't know why they did that. All right, and the other thing we have to do is we have to put a required in front of this one. So this is what you need to type to get started. And at the bottom, I'm going to just do super.init. You might need to do super.init and then pass in the coder to the decoder or something like this. Let's see, what would it be? The external parameter name would be coder. So you'd see something like that. And then you would just pass in the internal name, which would be decoder or something like that. That's only if you're chaining it. All right, don't worry about that right now. The next thing we need to do is we need to save each of these attributes. And we're going to start with the encode with encoder. So I don't know why I start with init, but I was just getting rid of the errors. If I build again, okay, so we have more errors. Lovely. So the thing we need to do here is we need to initialize all of our values from the coder. So we have to say self.firstname. And I don't have to use self here, but I'm just going to keep it consistent with what we have above. Self.firstname is equal to coder, and it's actually, the internal name is decoder. So we have to use the second word. So you're going to see an external parameter name and then a local parameter name, and we're going to use that one. And decode. Xcode is just loving me today. All right, so we want to do NSCoder and jump to, I can't jump to definition. I'm going to pull up in the documentation again. NSCoder is a different file. You can't press enter that quickly. You have to wait with the search. You have to wait, and then you can click on it. If you press enter, it goes to the wrong thing because the search results give the wrong results back. All right, so we are working with the decoder, and I want to decode values. So you want to think of the encoder as a black box that you can put things in and then you can pull things out of. And so we need to decode the values, and we're going to have to decode object values and things like that. So I'm going to look for encode object with key as well as decode object for key, and that's what I want to type here. Decode object for key. I pass in first name. So we're just going to do a convention here. I'm just going to pass in a thing that's the same name as the parameter or the property in string form with the double quotation marks. We'll do the same thing for each of these string values. This is a little error prone. As I build this, you'll notice that it cannot convert. So we'll see this message. Basically, it's saying that cannot convert from a nil type to string. So we have to use a as keyword and tell it we want to use this as a string. If I build again, you'll see that the error goes away. We just do that for each of these, converting to the appropriate type. All right, so now the last two are going to be a little bit different. We have to decode a double as well as decode an integer. So we'll say self.age is equal to decoder.decode. This is the integer, I think. And this will be our age. As long as they match, we should be good. And this is going to be as int. And then self.milepace is going to be a double. All right. And all right, so we typed something wrong. Let's look at what we have here. I'm looking for decode. Great. So here we have to do decode int to match int. Is it? Let's pull up in the documentation. I typed it wrong. It's decode int for key. and decode double for key. So pause the video, type that in. That should be working. I think it lied to me because I typed it wrong. It should be integer for key, not int for key, because integer, I believe, is a 64-bit and autocomplete's not working. Okay, so that's how you can load in stuff from a data file, but we really want to save stuff now. So this is why our application crashed, because we tried to save and there's no support for saving. So we have to do the reverse of what we just did, and that's going to be going from the object that we have to storing it in our black box based on our property names that we're going to pass in. So we're going to say encoder.encode string or encode object for key. I think we just do encode object, and we pass in first name, comma, for key, I believe. Could be wrong. Okay, that's right. And then we'll do encoder.encode object last name. I should have done less properties for our contact, but this shows you how to do it. Now, it's really important that these match, and in the ideal situation, I would create constant values for these strings, the last name, first name that you see in the double quotes, because you have the potential where you go to save this and you mistype something, you forget the capitalization, and all of a sudden your data is not saving or it's not loading properly. All right, so we did the three objects. Now we are going to encode our int, and I guess it's an integer. So we're going to pass in the age for key. This is age. Last one is encode double, which is our mile pace for key. Mile pace, and you can see I have a syntax error there. So I have an extra E here. Just make sure you type everything correctly. That should work. Let's go ahead. We'll add the contact. We'll click save and save successful. All right, so we're now getting closer to a point where we can actually go in and use this and see what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Finder. And in Finder, you can now see that we have a contact plist. If I open this up, you'll see the attributes somewhere in here. You see Pulse Salt, my email, my name, my mile pace. It's not in any particular order, but it's saved in this plist, and so we can just sort of quickly preview it and see that it's there. So our next step is to actually load this, and I'm going to go down to where we have the load button pressed, and I want to load the contact values. So here we are going to create a variable called contact, and this is going to be equal to our NSKeyedUnarchiver unarchive root object at path, maybe. Autocomplete's not working, so I'm going to just pass in our path here. We're going to have to calculate this path again. So since we're using this in two locations, I'm going to create a variable called path, and I'm going to assign it to the value that we have here. So this is going to be a new property. I'm going to just basically cut this line, and we'll paste it right here, and we don't need this first part. So what I did is I added another property, and okay, never mind. Xcode doesn't like me, so I'm not going to initialize it here. Maybe this will work. Okay, so path is going to be defined in our starting method. So we're going to scroll all the way up to viewDidLoad. We're going to set up the path so that we can reuse the same thing in multiple locations. So we'll just say path is equal to file and documents directory. And I scroll back down. I'm going to comment out our buggy line of code and try and build. And let's move our value out of here. I'm going to move our property up. And we have an issue where it's telling me that view controller has no initializers. Okay, right, because path is supposed to be a value, it's supposed to be initialized. We actually have to make it an unwrapped, implicitly unwrapped optional, much like we see with the text fields, so that we can assign it into our viewDidLoad. So if you see those types of scary messages, it's because you need to have an initializer. And in a view controller class, I don't like having an initializer because there's potentially two places where you can enter. You can enter if it's created with the init with coder, but you could also enter if it's created with the general init method, which means that you have to have two places to initialize the object, which can lead to issues if you try to create a screen for your iPhone app in code versus create it in the storyboard file. All right. So with that, we are going to really wrap this up. We're almost there. We can load what we have. So I can say var contact is equal to unarchived root object at path. And that's not the right name. So we're going to have to pull open the documentation. NSKeyedUnarchiver. We open the class reference. We're going to look for the unarchive object with file. That's what we need to do, unarchive. Now it's going to give me a warning. I'm going to treat this as a contact. And I want to do it as an optional contact. And what I actually want to do is I want to put this in an if let statement. So we'll say if let contact as contact. And actually this, we can either put the question mark here or we can put it in the right after the as. It's up to you. Now we have a valid contact if that loaded. And with that, we can add to UI. So we can say name text field dot text is equal to contact dot first name. And I typed that wrong. So it should be the first name text field. Then we have our last name text field. Then we have our email text field. So you can see there's a good amount of typing in this, and without autocomplete, it can be a lot more verbose and take more time. So what we're doing here is we're creating an entire app to save contact information to disk and load it back up and display it in the user interface that we created with the auto layout and all the bells and whistles for our application. So the last thing we need is the mile pace. Oops. Contact.milePace. And if we build, okay, so now we're trying to convert a number into a string. And so what we'll need to do is create I think the easiest thing is maybe to do an NS number and then say dot string value. there's a couple ways, or we could probably do a string object from a number, or we could do string interpolation. There's a couple different ways. Okay, maybe that doesn't work. That works. Okay, we're going to do a string and create a string with a number, and that's going to do it for us. Well, apparently you can't do that with a double, so we're going to have to do string interpolation here. This is really annoying. So I'll create a string. I'll do string interpolation where we pass in a backslash and then the name of the variable, and that should work. I'm going to add the contact. I'm going to save it. We've saved the contact, so if I switch over to Finder, you should see that the contact is there. Then I'm going to clear out all the text fields. I can type in some other values if I wanted to. And then I can hit load, and you'll see that it reloads everything that we had from the data file. So that is it. We created the contact app. This was a long project, but you now have a working app. It took, I guess, 2 hours to go through all this stuff. Maybe next time I won't give as much commentary. It's really up to you if you like this video. So that is it for this application. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching or you learned something, hit the like button, or you can subscribe on YouTube. Or if you're watching this in my course, thanks for sticking around. Watch this at 2x speed so that you don't take as long. Gotta kill the stream.